Hello and welcome to the London College of Communications Value Talks, a series dedicated to exploring race, gender, power and education. My name is Jordan Jarrett Bryan from It's All Black Academic. We are a platform that has open and honest discussions around things that are happening and affecting the Black community on our YouTube channel. If you're not seeing it yet, go check it out. And I've got three fantastic guests with me here today to have a discussion around education and higher education, more specifically in 2020. I'm going to start off by letting the guys introduce themselves, and I'll kick off with Prachee.
Hi, I'm Prachee. I'm a BA Media Communication student at London College of Communication, and I'm also a Changemaker at UAL.
And Rachel, I'm joined here as well. Do you want to kick off and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Rachel. I am an MA screenwriting student at London College of Communication, and I am also a student changemaker.
Brilliant. And last but not least.
Hello, I'm Steve Cross. I'm the Dean of the School of Media at London College of Communication, which is one of the colleges of University of the Arts, London.
So this whole discussion is going to be, I think, interesting and a learning one for me, because I think that the subject of education and higher education this year, more so than any other, I believe, has been on the forefront of the discussion around, equality and rights and racial tensions, and kind of fake news around COVID and what's real and what's not. So education generally, I think, is a very hot topic right now. Let me kick off by asking everybody, what do you think? I'll start with you, Prachee. What do you think is valuable about entering higher education now?
Actually, I feel like right now there's a lot more that's valuable than higher education personally, because as an international student, I feel like I come to a different country for higher education to get the most out of it. So I'm unsure of how much you could get out of it right now, but at the same time, it is a good period to start learning things. And I don't know, in terms of like, it's one of those phases in life right now where I'm not sure what else you could do as a student apart from just keep learning as well. But it's also like, at the same time, I feel like this year you could take the time out and not learn and not have to study, because you might not get everything out of it as you would normally. Yeah.
Sure. Rachel, what do you think? Do you think that now is more than ever higher education is important, or do you think that there's a value in just whatever your profession that you want to get into, getting into that as soon as possible now is the best way to kind of starting your career?
So I think online learning is a challenge. So that's definitely like something to think about. If that's not the best way that you learn, maybe it is best to get into the profession right away. But just having completed my BA and worked for a while after that, my education definitely prompted me to get the jobs that I wanted. It prompted me to move forward in my career. So I just feel like it's never not useful to go into higher education. In my experience, it's always been a part of me moving on to the next step in my career aspirations. So I feel like it gives you a community, a network of people, and you just don't know who you're going to meet and where it's going to take you. And like higher education definitely can be a platform for that, I think.
And I didn't go to university, guys, so it's the whole experience of going to uni is totally alien to me. I got into work and writing and journalism very, very early. But the reason why I asked that initial question is because whilst I agree with you, Rachel, that you can never be worse off with an education and with a degree and with qualifications. It can never be a bad thing to have qualifications.
Yeah.
I just wonder now, with the costs of university, certain professions that don't even ask for qualifications anymore, if there are limited industries and limited genres of work and careers that actually require it. And if you are almost setting yourself back 30, 40, 50,000 pounds and 4, 5, 6, 7 years from where you could be if you just got into the working force earlier on.
I mean, I guess I can kind of speak to that from my own experience. I think that, where I went to school, my education made it affected what my base salary was going into my career. So it kind of depends on what you want and what you're looking for, I think. I mean, I think everyone's path is different and you can definitely start off in different levels. But for me, especially, I have a BA in photography, BFA. So I was going into an arts profession where necessarily I don't know if I would have needed to, spend all the money I did on higher education, but it did put me in a position to work for companies that, paid a bit more when I got out of school. And I was able to get internships that you had to be in school to have, which was an entry point to me getting jobs after. So I think it's just something to think about in that sense also.
Stephen, you're obviously a proponent of education and higher education. So I'm not going to ask you if you think it's valuable, because clearly I know what the answer is going to be. But I guess the question I want to ask,
because otherwise I'd lose my job.
Yeah. But I guess what I want to ask you is, have you noticed that it's becoming less and less needed in terms of wanting to thrive and do well in the majority of careers?
Well, actually, weirdly, I think it's probably the opposite, actually. More and more careers and quite entry-level jobs in careers are requiring entrants to be graduates. Mm-hmm. So I think that on that level, it's it's very important, I think. I mean, obviously, we're not saying that absolutely everybody needs to go to university or to get or to enter into higher education to get into the job market. But a lot of jobs now do have those kind of entry-level qualification, being a graduate, and I think that's kind of increasingly the case globally rather than just within the UK. So there's obviously that dimension to the value of going into higher education, because the question asks us about what the value of it is. Do we think it's valuable? And I think there's two kind of particular things that I kind of wanted to say about that. The question of value kind of can be divided really into two different things, really. One is exchange value, that we get the qualification and it can then be sort of exchanged on the market, if you like, for a better job. Or there's use value of education, which is what's the use of it? What's the personal use of it to me? And I think Rachel and Prachee both sort of said something quite similar there, which is that it's about the experience as much as it's about the kind of capacity to exchange the qualification for a higher level entry into a particular type of job market. Rachel mentioned kind of networking and so forth, and the value of that kind of less quantifiable sort of experience that being in HE brings you. It's the kind of contacts with other people, the ideas that get generated through the discussions that people have. The people, people often say that they make the friends that they have for life while they're at university and so forth. And those can be also not just be friends, but also kind of contacts in the future that will allow them through networks to kind of meet other people, to develop kind of career opportunities or project opportunities and so forth. And I think that kind of adds a kind of different dimension to it than just sort of straightforwardly thinking that it's something about jobs, if that makes sense.
Sure. But just to kind of counter that point then, while I totally understand what you're saying there, Stephen, for many students, they won't have and this is a horrible word to use, but the luxury of going into higher education and having that experience. For some people, they need to get a job. They don't have the time and the resources and the finances to go to that next level, to be able to experience all the things you've just so well explained there. Now, that's obviously an economic, socioeconomic situation. But for some students that appreciate education and qualifications, but don't have the time or the money or the resources to spend 3-4 years and 50 grand getting what you've just explained there, what do you think? What do you say to those kinds of students and the need to just get into the job market, whatever your creative kind of area of interest is?
Well, obviously, it's not the only route into interesting creative careers or jobs, by any stretch of the imagination. You know that very well yourself, I think because we're here to talk about HE, obviously that's kind of the focus, I suppose. And clearly, there's the other dimension to your question is about the cost of it and so forth, and is it a luxury? And I was fortunate enough, because I'm of an age to remember the time when HE was broadly speaking free in the UK, at least. You didn't have to pay fees. You were given some kind of subsistence grant to be able to do it. It was a lot more kind of egalitarian, I would say, in its ethos. Not that vast numbers of people went into HE at that point, but for different sets of reasons. Yeah. So kind of what's happened is that there's been an expanded idea that people should go into higher education, and at the same time it's become more costly to do so, because people are doing that kind of balancing thing in terms of, will it provide me with more opportunities, and therefore they're kind of weighing up the kind of cost effectiveness of it. There's a whole set of dimensions here about the marketization of HE, which I won't kind of go into. I profoundly disagree with that, and I'm profoundly in favor of expanding HE so that everybody can at some point in their life access it, not necessarily when they're 18, but access it in a way that is right for them, and in a way that's kind of economically viable for them as well. I mean, I'd be a proponent of abolishing the fee structure and so forth, but that's my personal opinion. Yeah.
Sure. Prachee, let me pick up with you on the next one. Do you think universities are equipped in terms of getting students on the pathway to their dream jobs? Do you feel like going to university, you're confident that you are on that, that's helping you get on that pathway to the job and career that you want to obtain?
Personally, if it's like depending on my complete personal experience, I don't think so at all. Like, I feel like I go to university to sort of also understand what I don't want to do, if that makes sense. Like,
Sure.
Everything I learn, I'm like, I'm not sure if this is what I want to get into. Plus, I feel like especially with degrees, like the creative degrees that we do, like screenwriting and media and things like that, they are open to a lot of different things. So you might have a dream job, but that doesn't mean that your degree is going to get you that. It just means that your degree might be a step in the process. But with a lot of different jobs, you need a lot of things except like everything you learn as well. That being said, university does provide you, as Rachel said earlier, with so much network and like so many other things apart from the actual education, that way it could be equipped. Because there's a lot of jobs that I wouldn't like, especially let's say with UAL, like I freelance a lot right now, and all the opportunities that I got freelancing is because of Creative Opportunities, which is a program that UAL runs to help students look for these. So there's a lot of things that I wouldn't have if I moved to London without being a student at UAL. I don't think I would have gotten like 80% of the opportunities I got right now. But even right now, this conversation is because me and Rachel are change makers at university, which allows us to be part of conversations like these. So in terms of the bigger picture of things, I feel like it's equipped enough to help you sort of find where you're going to be, but not in terms of the actual education probably, but more so on like what else does the university have to offer, if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, totally. Rachel, do you agree that it's not necessarily, university doesn't necessarily open up the pathway to getting the dream job you want to do? And I should have asked at the start, briefly explain to us what Changemakers are.
Me or Prachee?
Oh, sorry, you, Rachel.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Changemakers are working to kind of decolonize the curriculum, basically. So our goal is to go in and kind of look at the academic world and academia and make it more inclusive, and kind of use our roles and our different areas of experience to try and make it as diverse, kind of remind academic tutors and everything about how to decolonize really. And so it's really looking at making the curriculum and the academic experience inclusive for, everyone, not just, white Western people.
Yeah.
So.
You can say it.
Yeah, but so it's making it inclusive for everyone and not so singularly focused on Western colonial ideas.
Okay. What do you guys think are the key influences that encourage young people to go into and indeed stay within higher education? And family and socials are something that I know a lot of young people are driven, that drives them towards it. And those kind of pressures, career aspirations, that might be something that is the sole reason you're at university, or just the need. I think Steve mentioned it earlier on, just the need and want to just learn more. Some people at university, I've got friends that are at university, they don't know what they want to do. They just want to be in that environment of learning. They want to be around other people that enjoy reading, enjoy expanding their minds. What for you are the key drivers? I'll start with you, Rachel.
Yeah, so I think at one point or another, all of them have been. For my undergraduate, I definitely, it wasn't an option with my parents that I wasn't going, to college. So that's number one. But I also definitely wanted to, and for learning to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, to explore and developed my craft. I was doing photography at the time, so just, it felt right. And then for my decision to go back to school after working and getting a job is because I decided I wanted to change my career. And so now I'm doing screenwriting, and I just thought that, well, my starting point should be able to learn, I guess, and kind of, again, work on my craft and have that community of people that you wouldn't necessarily get in the workforce when you start off alone. You can kind of go and in education, learn, share ideas, talk to people, all of that. You're all kind of have the same interests and are on the same level, and then go out into the work world. So that's why I went back for, so all of it has definitely made me want to be in higher education at one point or another.
Indeed. And for you, Prachee, what was the driving force? What was the main reason you wanted to pursue higher education?
It was because I think obviously I'm an immigrant, so I'm new to London as well. So I think that was the main reason. It was I needed to leave my country, but also because a degree in another country is more respected. But other than that, higher education in general is because, lucky for me, my parents did give me the option of not pursuing college immediately if I wanted to. But it was more so that I've never learned anything related to the arts before, because I'm from a very Indian educational background where media and stuff wasn't as it wasn't given the kind of exploration that it deserves. So I thought that I wanted to actually understand a bit more about the degree and actually learn stuff within an art school. So that was the main driving factor for me. But also because I knew that if I got a degree from, let's say, UAL or a highly respected Western university, I could go back and make more money. It was just that aspect for me, because I could have stayed back and not done anything and just worked, but I wouldn't have been able to get the opportunities that I thought I will get if I go back with a degree from London now.
That's interesting, and I'd like to ask the two of you. I'm going off script here, but just thought of a question here, listening to both of you guys speak. You guys aren't from the UK, so within Asian kind of households, and definitely African and to some degree Caribbean households, there's this kind of stereotype joke that you're going to be a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer. Those are three things. Education is not an option to not go to university or college. You're going. Is that something that still is very prevalent within those particular cultures and abroad indeed, or within your kind of how you grew up? Has that been changing, and are people from those cultures and backgrounds understanding that you can be successful and rich and happy without going through higher education?
Yeah, for me, that is definitely rings true. My dad is of Caribbean descent, and there was no option. I was going to college. It gave him a bit of a heart attack when I said it was going to be for photography. So it wasn't and then I had just, I'm 28, so I worked for a while before I went back for my master's in screenwriting. And again, I quit my job to go back to school. And again, I gave my parents a mini heart attack because they were like, you went to school, you got a
You're
career.
just mean. You're just mean.
And it's another art. So I definitely think those things ring true. I think especially just speaking of from, an American point of view and coming from a Black family, there is this, it's still very prevalent that you need to get a degree to be, to get a job, what would be classified as a good job. I say that loosely, but you need a degree for, also respect for all these things that are, wrapped up in racism in America. So I think that definitely for my BA, that was part of the reason why my family was definitely, you need to go, because you're not gonna, be successful, or considered intelligent or all those other things. So I would say that it's still definitely still true. And I have other friends that are Black had the same experience. So, yeah.
Prachee, what about you? From your culture and where you're from, is it still very much the child has to go to higher education, you know, doctor, lawyer, engineer, anything other than that, and you're a failure, don't come back home? Or is that changed?
I mean, again, I'm really lucky. My parents are kind of chilled out because they're the only ones in their family that got degrees. So they're very like, okay, we know the worth without one also, because they're all doing pretty okay. But my brother is an engineer. And
you see?
Yeah.
I knew it.
Yeah, my brother's an engineer. So it was kind of like, because he's older and one of the kids already did like engineering, it was sort of like, okay, I guess you can do whatever you want. But I initially wanted to pursue theater. And that was something my parents like were very against. Like they were like, we aren't spending this kind of money for you to go pursue a degree that you won't earn the money back in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of mentality my family has, where it's like media is so broad that they're like, okay, we know you'll be able to do something and get money out of it. But right now it's very, if I did something like theater or like fine arts, they would have not let me pursue that at all. Like they just were completely against it because they didn't think that was something that could make money. So they didn't think it was worth investing into it.
And Stephen, from your point of view, are you hearing different reasons and rationales from students as to why they're at university?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, of course. And I think, you know, I mean, both Prachee and Rachel Rachel has done 2 degrees, both in you know, similar kind of arts related fields, and Prachee's on her in the course of doing her first one. It's a very specific institution, UAL. Obviously, it's an arts-based institution, and for both of the reasons that Prachee and Rachel have given there, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of expectations, but it can also be applied to kind of class as well. I think in you know, thinking about the UK context, a lot of kids from working class backgrounds who maybe the first person in their family to go to university, some of those similar pressures will apply there in relationship to, you know, why on earth do you want to do something that sounds a bit kind of airy-fairy, so to speak, you know, to use a very UK expression. I mean, it happened to me. I was the first person in my family to go to university. And when my father, you know, asked me what I was going to do, and I said, I'm determined to do English, which was considered to be super airy-fairy in my household, the response was, well, that's not going to help the country sell tractors to Uruguay. I don't know why Uruguay particularly. It seems like, you know, something incredibly practical and down to earth and so forth, I suppose. And so I think those things. I mean, a lot of this then becomes about, I think, people's personal sort of drive to pursue a particular kind of subject at university. That's a lot more kind of tied up with a sense of who they are, of what they really want to learn and so forth, which I think is one of the comments that Prachee has come back to quite often. That sort of sense of, you know, a real sense of what it is that you want to do in order to experience a kind of set of learning opportunities, rather than just a route to getting a better job, if that all makes sense. So I think there are different levels. If we were talking at maybe a more kind of traditional university, and we were talking to students who or a dean of accountancy or whatever, we might be having quite a different conversation, if that makes sense. But I think the UAL kind of set of courses that we do, they do attract particular types of student that often are much more driven by sort of more personal motives than by kind of ideas about, you know, I hope it gets me a job that's going to earn me more money. That's often a kind of, yeah, it did, but maybe not the primary reason.
Sure. And I'll start with you on this one, Prachee. Just on the subject of money, how much a role does money and earning play in the decision to go into university? I've kind of asked that one, but more pertinently, how much do you worry about the return? So do you ever think to yourself, I have to make this degree work because this is costing me so much money? And kind of conversely, are you confident that you will make the money that you want to make at the other end of this? Or do you have concerns that, you know what, this is all well and good, learning more, reading more, expanding my mind, but I'm probably not going to make the money to be able to have the kind of lifestyle that I want at the end of it?
I mean, to be honest, that is something that I constantly worry about because obviously, as I said, I'm an international student, so everything is out of pocket. It's not loans. It's not like I get any sponsorship from the government right now. So that is something that I know my parents don't. My parents are very big on education, so I know they aren't expecting me to return the money at all ever. But it's for me, I don't think I could achieve what I wanted to. Like, I don't think I've achieved enough if I can't even make back the kind of money I'm putting into my education. Like, I don't think I would have achieved anything then. But I can like confidently say, but I think that also comes a lot from everything you do outside of university. Like if I was in London right now and I did get a first class, but I didn't take any other opportunities around London, I don't think I would be confident enough to tell you that I can make my money back. I think it has to come with a lot of, oh, okay, even though I'm driven and I'm doing well in my actual papers and my assignments, how much am I doing outside of that? Because everyone can get a first class degree. So I feel like even though university is important, it is something that you're investing a lot of money into, but you don't know if that alone is going to give you the returns on it. Like you need to be able to utilize everything around it, if that makes sense.
Totally. Rachel, Prachee just really answered really well a really messy question. So I'm going to try and make it a bit clearer to you. I guess what I'm asking is, first of all, what is your experience in terms of, do you have concerns about returning the money that you're investing in your education now? But as a follow-up to that, some people won't have a family that have lots of money that can afford to kind of supplement their education. Some of your friends or colleagues, how stressed do they get and the backgrounds they come from in regards to, this has to work for me, because if it doesn't, I'm going to be 30, 40, 50 grand in debt and I don't have mum or dad that can write that check off?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Prachee made a really good point about taking advantage of the opportunities outside of school, or like that the university can afford you to take. I mean, I also come from a background where my parents could pay for my school and all that, so I didn't necessarily have that stress. But if I look at my trajectory after getting my, my BA and getting jobs and everything, I did get jobs where I was able to support myself after college, and really I was like, okay, well, like I guess I mean, American schools are very expensive, so I don't know if I would make all of it back, but I got to a point where I could support myself. But I got there because while I was in university, I did internships every year, which made me connections to get a job outside of it. So it's kind of, your schoolwork and your outside of schoolwork goes hand in hand. I feel like if you're in higher education, you should, and you want your return. And I found that for friends who, didn't have, like you said, like, that safety net, I guess, is they were always also working outside of school so I think they just go together. You can't just focus on grades.
Yeah.
If I could just add really quickly, I do have a cousin that's from here, and she dropped out because she didn't think it was worth spending one more year's money into education. So she dropped out in her second year, and she's taking time off to just make money right now, like by part-times and stuff, just so that when she goes back, she doesn't have to worry that much more about the debt. So that is something that I know plays into like a very personal like experience of right now. Like I'm not taking allowance from my parents, which is why like every day I'm kind of more stressed about money. But it was, if I also had to stress about my fees and paying that back, I don't think I would continue studying, because I feel like sometimes if you don't have a safety net like that, you can just think it's not worth it completely because of the amount of stress it can bring to you.
As Stephen, Prachee and Rachel talk about the safety net that they have, their families have, are able to financially help and support them through their higher education. I imagine you see lots of students that don't have that, but yet want to have a higher education. I guess it can go one of two ways. It can kind of go one way where they're so stressed about having to complete their degree that it just implodes and it just gets so much, and they can't achieve that degree because they're so stressed about the money elements of it. Or it can go the other way where they're so focused, they just know this has to work. I have to get this top degree, because if I don't, the consequences I don't want to think about. What do you see that stress play out in students when you can tell financially, they're concerned about the outcome of their degree and their particular qualification?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's very common. Just nationally there's been a kind of exponential rise in students reporting kind of mental health difficulties, anxiety, stress, etc., etc. And I think a lot of that seems to be, I mean, there are other factors at play in that, obviously, but the fact of the fees and the loans and so forth does make it a much more stressful environment for people. It's clear, you know. So but this is something that us as an institution, UAL, we can try and mitigate that with hardship funds and also putting all of the things that Rachel and Prachee have mentioned in place. You know, opportunities for students to get internships, to work internally in the university with the arts temps, the agency that we run, etc., to help out with these things. But there's just no doubt about it, and Rachel will know much better than this, because the HE system in the US is much more expensive, and it's always been much more kind of privately oriented than the HE system in the UK. So and I think this is pretty much the same in India too, isn't it? To get into good schools, etc. It's an expensive proposition. So it does add another dimension of stress to students, absolutely, without a doubt. Yeah, it does.
Rachel, what's university for, and who is it for? So I want you guys to tell me, what is its fundamental role? What is the point of university? And is it for everybody, or do we have to just accept that once we define what university is, we then have to just accept that it's for certain people and not for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I think how it currently functions, it doesn't look like it's for everyone, just with all the, like, you know, economic discussions we've been having now. You know, there's a lot of exclusivity in higher education, but I don't think that should be the case. I do think that, you know, learning is for everyone. Education should be available and accessible to everyone. I know that out of my life and my work outside of, you know, once I was 18, I used a lot what I learned in college, and I will be using what I learned in my MA more than I've, you know, used that I learned in high school. So I just think that it should be for everyone. I think higher education gives you the opportunity to explore your true interests and what you really want to, you know, learn about and expand those things. So yeah, I think it should be for everyone, but there's some work to do on making it.
For sure. Prachee, what is university's role? What is it?
I mean, I agree with Rachel. I mean, it should be for everyone, but as it stands right now, it is for the privileged to get more privileged, if that makes sense. Like, that's just the way I look at it. If you already didn't have, let's say, you didn't go to private school and you didn't do this and you didn't do that, it's very hard to be like, oh, I'm good at this really good university now, and I'm going to get a job at like JP Morgan or like HSBC. Like, this is the very traditional way of looking at it. And so it's obviously like you already had the steps of being privileged and like having the money, or like maybe race in some way favoring you to get into all of these places. And then you can become richer, if that makes sense. Like, that's what I see university as. Like, that's the role it plays. It plays like a catalyst in the middle of helping the privileged already get more privileged. But I don't see university specifically as a way of helping people from different backgrounds get to somewhere else. That's a like secondary primary school education level that changes something like that. But I don't know how much like university would play into that factor if you didn't already have the base, because it's like the second step. So university is a catalyst, but it needs to be like the first step needs to be the one that can fix things, if that makes sense.
No, totally. Stephen, we have this website called google.com. Don't know if you've heard of it. And it's pretty much got everything on there. So my question's going to be a little bit trite, if you like. But for those that maybe can't afford education, higher education in universities, I mean, essentially, if you know what you want to do and what you want to study and what career you want to pursue, you could essentially learn and gain higher education just by the internet. You don't have to necessarily go to universities to kind of acquire the same level of knowledge or intelligence that the two ladies on the call here have and are paying good money for. If you're not part of that, as Prachee says here, privileged group of people that can afford higher education, you can find other means in which to educate yourselves, no?
You absolutely can, yeah. There's no doubt about it. And there are different types of education as well that are not just people Googling random things, yeah. And
I'm
then
being a little bit silly, but you know what I mean.
I do absolutely know what you mean, yeah. But I mean, without wanting people to fall down the rabbit hole of Google and then end up in this sort of endless series of searches, there are obviously different things. I mean, I think I would still hold on to that sense. I mean, I absolutely 100% take the point, and I'm the last person to kind of want to defend anything at all to do with bastions of privilege and so forth. But I think there is a value that the HE experience can give to people that's beyond just the acquisition of facts, if that makes sense. And it's a kind of crucial thing about learning about developing an expanded set of ideas about the world that we live in, the place that we have in the world, and why that is the case. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's the analytical tools that it allows students and graduates to develop, so that they can look at those things in a critical fashion. Rachel and Prachee are obviously changemakers, as they introduce themselves to be. Those are kind of key things, if you like, in relationship to how being part of an institution, learning how to critique the institution even while you're inside it, are things that are the most valuable dimensions of education. Yeah, I mean, where does that kind of sense of being able to kind of spot, analyze, and come up with solutions to things like injustice kind of come from? Now, they don't always and only happen inside HE institutions, obviously, but they can really kind of help people give a real interesting contextual sense to where they are, who they are, and what the sort of systems of power and the structures of power and so forth, how they operate, how they function, and also how they can be dismantled, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the last couple of questions are the juicy ones that I'm really, really super keen to hear all three of your thoughts on. How well, in fact, I'm going to stick with you, Stephen, to start with this one. How well do you think universities serve students of colour? Because I have a lot of friends that went to and are going to universities, and I constantly hear lecturers and professors invariably will be white men. And I think, again, I said at the top, this year more than any year, the issue of identity and racism and self-identity has been so prevalent. I just wonder how important it is that the representation of those people within those institutions is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a major issue. Yeah. So without wanting to be an advocate exclusively of what UAL does, I mean, obviously we're on the same journey of change that many other places are. My personal experience of this is that things like I mean, I think this actually kind of slightly relates to the next question, but things like BLM when they happen are fantastic catalysts for pushing those moments of change forward. Now, obviously, moments of change can only be pushed forward if there's a kind of openness to allowing that to happen. And at their best, universities can have that openness. At their worst, they can be absolute blockers to that type of change. Yeah. So the key thing that we need to kind of keep foregrounded is that there is a lot of openness. I mean, partly through some of the things that I've said, HE institutions do tend to be rather more liberal than other types of institutions, perhaps banks or whatever. Not to do any disservice to banks, but they are. But the key thing is that like everywhere else in society, they reflect sedimented layers of privilege that have been there for hundreds of years. They've been historically very white. They haven't taken seriously some of the agendas that people have wanted to push forward more. And I think back to the previous question about should universities be for everyone or are they for everyone? Well, the obvious thing is they absolutely absolutely 100% should be for everyone, and are they? No, they're not. They're not in the same way that we might want them to be, or in absolutely the way that we might want them to be. And the key thing is to keep pushing forward those agendas to ensure that they are. That's by dismantling layers of privilege, by showing it up, highlighting what's wrong with this institution. Why does it look like this? Why in a city like London, which is one of the very multicultural global cities of the world, do universities still look so white? Do you know what I mean? So I think those are the things that Changemakers, one of the things that we have at the university and so forth, are just supremely important, because it's allowing us to push forward those agendas, shining lights on areas where the curriculum is still kind of probably often unconsciously quite white biased, nowhere near as diverse as it should be, and not allowing the kind of diversity to really sort of flourish inside the institution and drive that institution too. That's my kind of take on it.
Rachel, what have the universities that you've been to been like in terms of representation, and why is it important? That's also key as well.
Yeah, so I mean,
be honest as well. I want you both to be honest with this as well. Don't hold back.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to be completely honest. So yeah, for my undergrad, it was interesting because I got really lucky. The head of my department was a Black woman who specialized in African American studies and photography, and that was great and a completely different experience for me than any other education that I've had in terms of having my culture represented to me in class. But at the same time, that was one teacher in the school, and I was one of very few Black students or student of color in my program. So I ended up doing, for my thesis project, I went around to all different higher education colleges around America, photographing Black women in college and interviewing them about their experience, because I was so desperate for that community that I don't think higher education does a good job of providing for students of color. And I think it's especially important to developing your identity. It definitely was for me. Like, I was just craving, wanting to like see other people that looked like me, at school, and what were their experiences like? Were they like mine? I don't know. And it can be very isolating. And then at UAL, I'm the only Black student in my program now in my master's. I don't have any teachers of color, so we don't have that. So I think
not one.
Not one teacher of color. Yeah. Okay. So again, I'm a bit older now. I have a different kind of approach to my identity and like finding resources and whatnot. So it's not the same experience as in my undergrad, but I just think that it's great that the university is open to change and definitely does feel like a space where I don't feel as if I shouldn't be there or anything like that. But it's that second half of looking at how do you build a community to support your students of color so that they feel like, that their experiences are seen, and then they can also look to other people of color in the industries that they're, learning about for inspiration, all those things that you don't get, I guess, you actually don't get in higher education.
Sure. Yeah, no. And just before I come to Prachee, just with you, Rachel, as well, why is it important that you have more lecturers and professors that look like you? Because some would say, well, as long as the lecturers are really good and doing their job and, they're educating you and they're doing their job, then why does it matter what color they are? Why would it make a difference? Why does a Black lecturer who's very good make a difference in someone that's just a very good lecturer?
Yeah, because, if I'm a student, which I am, I've never worked in the industry that I want to be in. How can I visualize myself in that industry? How can I see myself succeeding if I don't ever see anyone else that looks like me there? So even though it's not just about learning the skills, it's also about, especially I have work experience now, you have skills, but you need to understand what it might be like in the workplace or what it might be like to use these skills. And if you can't see someone who looks like you, how can you imagine that you can be a part of that workplace? It just feels like, I think you can imagine it, but it kind of just feels like you're alone on an island, trying to get somewhere. And it's like, is there anyone else for support? Again, I think it's support and community.
And same question to you. How many black or non-white lecturers, should I say, have you had, and why is it important that there are more?
So I did a foundation year at UAL before I started my degree. So I've been around in UAL for like 3 years now. So when I did my foundation year, obviously I'm lucky enough that it was an international foundation. So all my friends were immigrants as well, and everyone so that was great. But we were only taught by white teachers, all of foundation, which as like a group of people teaching immigrants, it didn't sit well with me because they had a hard time trying to understand how, like, what we were saying and stuff like that. And it also obviously it was everyone's first year, so that was something, like, that was the one place where I felt like I don't want to be here because they don't want me to be here, is what I felt. But since my degree started, in my first year of my degree as well, I only had white tutors, and in my second year I have, like, most of my tutors are women of color, not even just people of color, but like women of color. So that made a very big difference to my attention already. And I picked up on it just last year as well, because I have an Indian tutor now, and and a black tutor. And I'm very close to them personally, because as much as I loved all the other tutors I had, and they were really good at what they were teaching and everything, it's something about the lack of lived experience that doesn't sit with me. Because as much as you can be a white person that is completely understanding and like empathizes and understands what it's like to be a person of color, it's not gonna be the same until you've experienced it.
Can you or Rachel give me an example? Putting on the spot here, but can you think of an example where having a lecturer or a professor that is not white, or even from your particular country or ethnicity, an example of where that example is why it's better for me to have that person teaching me? Can you think of an example?
Yeah. So obviously, my degree is very culture based. Like, everything you do is in the current moment, like pop culture oriented. And our head of one of our modules last year, she is a black woman, and all the examples she got in to class were people of color examples, like everything related to the regular consumption of like an Indian or a black student. It would be those examples. Like, we had examples related to like Stormzy and like Skepta, and like she also knew everything about Bollywood enough to like bring it into context, being like, oh yeah, even if you're from India, these are the cultural aspects that like other people don't need to think about. Like, you don't, because obviously when you're from like a non-white background, it comes with a lot of community thoughts that we don't think about, which does add to our culture. And white countries usually have a very individualistic approach, so they don't understand a lot of the family aspects of things. So even as a lecturer teaching about culture, it's important to mention these other aspects.
So I'm going to push back and I'm going to challenge you here now. I'm going to role play, and Rachel, feel free to help out and jump in here. I'm Bob Jones, a white lecturer, a white professor. I spent 3.5 years living in India, so I'm very well versed actually in Indian culture. I know Indian food. I know Indian families. I'm very, very good on India. So I'm white. What's the problem?
You don't look like me. I mean, isn't that the basic problem here? It would be, okay, you have all this knowledge, but immediately when I look at you, you're not the person I'm going to come and sit next to in the room. Like, I'm not feeling that sense of comfort in any way, because people are looking at me and looking at you in completely different things, even though we have the same knowledge.
Yeah, your lived experience is just different. Like, you're an observer rather actually experiencing that culture
also,
on your own.
Yeah. Also be tokenizing, to be like, I'm a white person, but I'm going to tell you about your culture. It's just like, okay. Cool.
So I mean, I know the answer, but I just thought it was important for you to explain that. But I guess what you're saying is that you're much more inclined to listen to that person and take in what they're saying if he or she looks like you, comes from your background, or even if they're not necessarily Indian, they have some kind of lived experiences on par with your as a non-white person.
Yeah. Definitely.
Get it. And just finally, will the equality and inclusion rhetoric and energy of this year, spurred on by the BLM movement, lead to change in what we want to see going forward next year. So how many of you guys believe that what's happened this year is a powder keg and is a spark, if you like, for actual tangible change going forward? And Stephen alluded to the fact that hopefully the institution of higher education will look at things like how many Black and ethnic minority lecturers do we have at our universities and address that. Are you guys quite hopeful that this will be the spark for change? So if we have this same meeting this time next year, we could say, oh, you know what, actually, this has changed and I've seen that changed. Or do you feel like there's a lot of performative politics going on here?
Rachel, do you want to start with that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, whoever. Yeah.
Okay. I am hopeful and I'm optimistic because I do think there is a sense of openness, you know, but I do.
You're laughing as you say it there, Rachel. You don't, but do you really believe that? Do you really believe that? Come on.
No, I am hopeful, but I'm like an optimistic person, but I do think it's going to be it will be slow and steady change rather than, you know, next year. If you were to say we were having this conversation, I think it would be a similar conversation. I really do. Just because it's not only about the current lectures being open, it's about bringing it, like, it's just going back to the last two questions, like the importance of having a community, a higher education community that's full of people of color as well. That's really where those little like nuances and layers in the, you know, curriculum and the experience will start to change. I mean, again, just to go back to the last question, I could think of many examples on where it would have been better to have a teacher of color to handle a certain situation in, you know, my now 5 years of in higher education. So like, and just recently, I was in class, we were doing a collaboration with animation students, and the student was drawing avatars of all of us. And the avatar that they drew of me was inherently racist and like very much like a cartoon that you would, if you were a person of color, you would have immediately realized that it wasn't appropriate. But the person wasn't trying to be offensive, and I had to explain to the teachers why it was offensive. It's that ignorance, or, you know, that you get by not having lived experience. And I know many other students who've had experiences like that. And it's just, in order to really improve the whole higher education setting, there has to be a representation of different voices. Like, it can't just be being open to change. You have to bring new people into the community to change it, which I think will take a long time.
Prachee, what does change look like, and what role do students within higher education play within that?
I mean, as students, what me and Rachel are doing is the first step that we can do is just talk about it as much as possible with people like Steve, who is literally the dean of our school, and he can sit with us and have this conversation. I think that is something that I value as a bit more change than it would have been 5 years ago, because I don't think we would have even got the opportunity to sit and talk about this. Mm-hmm. But with the Changemakers program, I'm not trying to be like a big advocate and be like, oh yeah, we're definitely, but I am very hopeful of change within this, because we've already had way more conversations related to decolonizing the curriculum than I don't think LCC has had before. And it is on the word. I know it might come across as performative and tokenizing, and I'm hoping that it's not that, and I'm hoping that everybody really wants the change. But that is something that we can hope. But as long as I feel like, as long as the change is happening, even if it might right now not be for the right intentions, as long as people of color get way more opportunities than they would initially, I would consider that as some change. And as long as these conversations aren't accounting to just a conversation, which I feel like right now it's not the case, because we have made, like, as Changemakers, we've actually made some change. Like, the reading lists are right now being re-improved at the moment. Like, there are courses that are going under reapproval, considering like what people of color need, like students of color need. So that is something that's actively happening. And that is, even though it's like a 0.1% change in the bigger institution of things, it is something. And I'm hoping by next year it moves to like 10% and then maybe more. But even if it is because UAL wants to show that they're doing change, and I don't know the intentions behind it, as long as it's happening and as long as it's favoring the students of color right now, I don't think it's all that bad.
I'll finish with you, Stephen. without putting the entire success of Black Lives Matter on your shoulders, because that would be a little bit unfair. You do have you do have a very significant role to play within the institution and the body and the group that you work within. What can you and what do you plan to do to ensure that you can use your voice and your position to ensure that some form of change? I take the lady's points that this isn't going to be a 12-month thing here before we see institutional change, but I think there are some small wins that we can get within the next 12 months. Mm-hmm. What can you do to ensure that within higher education, the landscape of how higher education looks in 12 months' time looks different?
Well, I mean, I think Prachee kind of alluded to one of the key things in terms of the diversity of the staff in that program that Prachee is actually studying in the communications and media program and the media communications course. Yeah. You know, without wanting to kind of emphasize various things, it was a conscious decision that to not put out adverts and hope that people of color applied for them in terms of job roles, but to be much more proactive in that. I mean, the conscious strategy there was to make that program as diverse as the city. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly, we're never ever going to be able to represent absolutely every type of student that we have in terms of the staff. Yeah, we obviously can't, because, you know, if we get a student from Tibet, we're not going to be able to hire someone from Tibet to specifically teach them so that they feel kind of super comfortable with that. But on the broadest sense, having a staff team that is as more or less diverse as the student body and as the city that we come from has to be a strategic goal. Yeah, because it can't not be, because otherwise, you know, we end up in exactly the kind of performative thing that you're talking about, where we can keep saying we're an anti-racist institution, we're you know, but really our students of international students of color, etc., and our staff need to be the kind of real drivers of this. Yeah, otherwise it's people, white people like me, speaking on behalf of and for and so forth, and I can be as much of an advocate and an ally as possible, but I still don't have that kind of strong real sense of the lived experience of people outside of my, you know, I'm a working class gay man, you know, that's a whole bunch of stuff that I bring to the table, if you like. But there's a whole lot of stuff that only by bringing very diverse ranges of people together can we ever get real serious proper conversations going about how to make places as inclusive as possible and how to make places as comfortable as possible for everybody. And that also significantly changes the entire kind of intellectual landscape of the institution, because it's people bringing different types of perspective, different types of sets of interests, values, and as I say, ideas to the table in a way that monolithically monocultural institutions, I think, will ultimately get completely left behind. You know, the world is not a monocultural place, and so the more kind of genuinely diverse we are, the more in tune we are with the world around us, and also we can be those kind of change. You know, the world is suddenly full of, you know, appalling politicians that do want monocultural worlds, you know, right across the globe. Yeah, and I think, you know, it's incumbent on us as institutions of higher education and of learning to really start kicking back against that. You know, that's my idea.
I totally agree. Guys, thank you very much for your time. Prachee, Rachel, and Stephen, thank you very much for joining me on this discussion here. If you enjoyed this talk, then check out the rest of the series where LCC has invited guests to discuss challenging views and develop ideas around today's values. Guys, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed that. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Stephen. Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Rachel. No, that's college. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Bye.